I'm Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. And in this video, I'm going to explain how to make some samples that'll save you a huge amount of time in the end.
So I'm going to talk to you guys about something that you're not going to want to do, but I promise you, if you come around to my way of looking at it, you will enjoy it, which is this. Making samples are the most important, is like one of the most important things you can do to save you time in the end. The extra time of fooling around with some copper or some silver or whatever and experimenting. And it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, you need to make the entire piece necessarily. But like, for example, we're gonna make a nice bangle. You want a nice hammer texture, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So if we start hammering and we don't like the texture that we've got, what the hell do we do? We've got to melt our gold down. So for me, I'm never going, unless I already know, like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this and use this hammer and I know pretty much what it looks like in my head and whatever. I'm going to do a little sample first. Again, it's not necessarily about making the entire piece, but I use copper all the time. Now, if I had thicker copper wire, which I probably have somewhere, I would try to get something exactly this thick. But I'm just going to grab some thick-ish wire to fool around with. Because, for example, you know, textures are never bad or wrong, but what I like may be totally different from what you like or what you're envisioning. So usually what I do, so I'll let you hold on to your gold, because the thing with gold, you know, you can't ruin it, but you can do something you don't like and then you have to melt and make sheet or wire again with it. And that's very time consuming. So I try to not do that unless I have to. So if I'm going to do a hammered project, I'm going to like look around and be like, okay, let me experiment with a little copper, brass. Sorry, I just need to try to, as a, copper is very soft. So this is soft and this is softer than what you've got there. But I mean, the softness of the metal doesn't matter so much when you're talking about hammering, because basically softer metal you have to hit harder. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you just adjust how hard you're hitting it. So for example, I might say to myself, I know a good texture to do. I'm going to try it. I'm going to put it right on here. And then you look at that, and if you're like, "Oh yes, I love it," you know what I mean? Great. You go to your piece. And if you don't, we're gonna like, "Oh, I don't like that. Let's go to something else. Let's use one of these, and we'll use the ball side." You know, let's say to do that. You see what I mean? And there's a million different things we can do. But the point is that generally speaking, students always resist really hard. When I'm like, okay, let's take, 10 minutes and grab a little copper and let's try that out. Or you know what I mean? Let's play with it a little bit. Because everybody naturally wants to get straight to their project, which is totally understandable. Yeah. But what I noticed is the longer I started making jewelry, you know what I mean, like as the years went by, I do this more and more and more and more. Because the time that you spend doing this saves you the 4 hours it would take you to get a texture you don't like and then remelt your gold. So I do this all the time with different type of things, you know what I mean? And it's one of those things, I remember when I was a student, I was like, I don't want to make a sample, I just want to make my piece. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. It's totally understandable. But just try to kind of like absorb that lesson that is really useful information. Because when you think about you're building your skills as a metalsmith, it's like a pool of data, right? One of the reasons that I can help you and you and you and you and you with your problems is I've fucked up things in all of those ways. Do you know what I mean? And all of that goes into the data pool. So like, for example, when I'm hammering this stuff, I know pretty much what those textures are going to look like because I've done that already. And it's in my head. So when you do samples, you're building a library in your head of information that you're like, oh, I think that little rounded hammer gave me a great texture. I mean, this is for all different kinds of techniques. But, so, when your brain is like, no, I just want to make my piece, just remember that a lot of times it saves you a lot of effort in the end to do that. And I do this all the time. You know what I mean? When I'm like, I don't know how am I gonna, I don't know if that's gonna look right. Because for me also, like, I see it in my head, but sometimes what you see in your head is not what you see in reality. And then you're like, no, that's not right. So experimentation and stuff like that is really worth your time. So just please keep that in mind when that little voice in your head is like, no, I don't have time for that. Like, actually, it saves you time in the end. So that's what I would recommend with something like that. Fool around with your piece of copper, go through with a few different hammers, do a few different things, and when you're like, yes, that's the one, then we'll go right to the one that we want on that, and we'll put the texture in that you want.
I mean, now I'm afraid it's too thin. I wish maybe I thought about stopping sooner because...
It's okay, we're just not gonna like hammer it like, you know, we're not gonna like smash it so it's very thin.
Yeah.
We're gonna just hit it enough to make like a texture.
Can you texture bezel walls?
But you gotta fill them.
What do you mean?
Well, meaning, when you have flat sheet, right, you can texture your sheet and then make a bezel out of that, right? But then wherever you join it, the texture is gonna be messed up. So normally, then you would have to like fill it with jet set or pitch or whatever and kind of retexture the seam a little bit. Or make the bezel, fill it with pitch, texture the whole thing all the way around. So like you can, it just takes extra steps.